Let's shift over to Thursday, the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament, at least in the Midwest, later in the week. Indiana State, the favorite, plus 165 over at BetMGM Sportsbook. Drake, plus 200. Then Bradley, plus 300. Northern Iowa, which beat Southern Illinois for that final bye in this conference tournament at 10-1. Belmont, 18-1. Southern Illinois, the aforementioned Salukis, at 25-1. By the way, I know we've been talking about the Jerome, but anybody that wants to get their conference tournament selections in, we have two sets of conference tournament pick'ems, which is free, and you could sign up over at play.thelines.com to win prizes. In this conference tournament, looking at some potential long shots, Rocco. So first off, I know everyone's going to be in love with the Sycamores because they have Robbie Avila, who I saw on Twitter last week was coined Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just a great nickname that I think I'm going to have to steal since it wasn't trademarked quite yet. But the one thing I want to ask you about before I dig into my long shot, looking at the Sycamores in particular, what do you make of Isaiah Swope's knee injury? Because that's one of the more underrated storylines going into this tournament for me. I know he kind of got back on track with his shooting efficiency in the regular season finale against Murray State, but he was the opposite, very inefficient over his final four games. He's not going to be having surgery until the offseason. Their second leading scorer behind Avila. How much do you think this affects the Sycamores in particular in the MVC tournament?
Well, it appears to me, since he's had the injury, that it's hard to say because they played a little bit of inferior competition with UIC Evansville, played decently well against a decent Murray State team. But yeah, we'll see, because I think what we'll get into here in a second is there's 4 or 5 other teams in this bracket that are starting to fire on all cylinders. And, and Indiana State's play in general, since they got through that last Drake game has dropped off some. Of course, took 2 losses during that stretch. One of them what you would call a bad loss at home to Illinois State, at least for a resume standpoint. So yeah, there's some concerns there as a whole. But I thought when they lost to Illinois State and Jason Kent went down, I think Jason Kent's probably their most important player because he does so much, rebounding, ball distributing, one of their best defenders. So if he's okay and Swope can go through the motions, maybe not shoot it as well, they'll still be a pretty high-level team.
Absolutely. Now, with that said, I'm going to take an upset to win this conference tournament. So this is my first official conference tournament futures bet here on Outside Shots. Belmont. I'm taking the Belmont Bruins, who, by the way, lost to Indiana State in the quarters. So going through this for me with the Bruins, they're the highest rated team per Haslam in the MVC since February 6th. Then per my ratings too, 6-1 during that stretch, 41st adjusted offense and 51st adjusted defensive efficiency. Top 5 in both categories, by the way, throughout league play. Best shooting team in the Valley by a pretty decent margin, and they play a 5-out offense. Jacoby Gillespie has been phenomenal this season. Top 135 assist rate, top 80 steal percentage, and he's shooting just under 40% from deep. Arguably one of the best and most underrated point guards when it comes to the mid-major level, and maybe across every single college basketball team in Division I. They would get Northern Iowa in the quarters, assuming they beat Valpo in the first leg of the MVC tournament. Remember, they lost to Northern Iowa in their second meeting against the Panthers, but they didn't have Gillespie in that matchup, and they lost the game by 11 as a result. Then they would get Indiana State potentially in the quarters, or in the semis, I should say, if they play Northern Iowa in the quarters. And Haslam actually projects Belmont as a 6-point dog to Indiana State, but they have the Northern Iowa game as a pick-em. So I think you're getting pretty good value with Belmont at 18-1 to win this conference tournament.
Wow.
And keep in mind, they could play up tempo with Indiana State, pretty high adjusted pace per KenPom. I really like this team, man. You play 5 out, you create a lot of mismatches, and again, you could play at a fast pace, which is going to be key against Indiana State if they do indeed play them in the semifinals. So backtracking a bit, you laughed at the Belmont pick. I'm assuming this could be one of your long shot plays here in the MVC tournament.
Yeah, I didn't mean to laugh so loud. I had a feeling you were going here, and we think a lot alike in these areas, Eli. So it's always awesome. Yeah, Belmont's my pick as well, and it's for a lot of the same reasons. I felt like you were reading right off my note sheet. That was a fun journey you took me on. But one other really important note that I think never gets talked about before the Missouri Valley, and I notice it every year in Arch Madness, is the format of the semis and finals. So you have a situation on Saturday. You play a doubleheader, CBS Sports Network on the cable version, and whoever has to play the later game, you turn around and you play an even earlier game in the championship on Built for TV CBS. In a lot of cases, the team on that side of the bracket, and I have to go back and do historicals, will come out a little flat, and you'll see a blowout in the championship game. And so Belmont being the 5, they're on the good side of that. If they can get to the semis, they're obviously going to have to get that huge win against likely Indiana State. They'll actually have the advantage in the championship game, where they probably have to play Drake or Bradley, and that's not going to be easy either. And here's the other thing. I think Northern Iowa is playing almost as good as Belmont. So if you want to look at the Panthers, they might have just as good of a shot, or almost as good of a shot. I just think the one thing that blew my mind, you guys, is go look at, since Gillespie came back from his injury, go look at his O rating in those games. Like, through the roof in every single game. And then you have Malik Dia, who NBA scouts are drooling over. They can run stuff through him at the high post. He's a great roller, elite rim protector. NBA's drooling about him. I wouldn't be surprised if he sneaks into the first round. Not my area of expertise, but I did sit by scouts when I covered Belmont's game against Arkansas State back in December. So anyway, I love the momentum of Belmont. I feel like Indiana State's kind of plateaued, plus the injury situation. And, Drake's playing very well and could easily win this thing as well. And never count out Bradley with Brian Wardle. He's won this event twice. So, going to be awesome.
All right, so Rocco, I'm going to ask Eli to pull back the curtain here a little bit, because to let everybody know, he has been debating this conference for about a week now, because he loves the Valley, loves Arch Madness. Longer, yeah, it has been 2 weeks, hasn't it? So trying to figure out who his pick's going to be here, because of all the mid-major tournaments, he loves this one. And I can tell you that with, in addition to Belmont, he was also considering Bradley for a little bit. He was considering Southern Illinois. So, Eli, give us like a sentence or two on ultimately why you did not pick Bradley in Southern Illinois.
Well, Bradley just matches up so poorly with Drake, which is the likely semifinal matchup. And then SIU, just turnovers, man. I mean, I think it's just so hard. I mean, it historically is. Rocco brought up some great historical nuggets, especially when you look back at previous MVC title games and just blowouts over the last 5 years to almost a decade in that title game, which is why maybe it's my only hesitation with Belmont, just because it's so hard to win 4 straight in any conference tournament, especially in the MVC. But they get Valpo in the first round, which, knock on wood, should be a bye, essentially. So unless they stub their toe and get into one of these unexpected close matchups, could be a little bit of a concern before the Northern Iowa game. But that's kind of my overall synopsis on why I went with Belmont. I'm concerned with Southern Illinois' turnovers, specifically with Xavier Johnson, who's one of the best scorers across college basketball. He's made a huge jump from last year to this year. And then Bradley, I just don't trust in that semifinal matchup. So if we get Belmont Drake, man, that would be a hell of a title game. I might have to hedge a little bit on my conference tournament futures with Belmont, but that's my logic behind that pick. Is that fair?
Sounds fair to me. I mean, just to put a period on your point about the turnaround on the bottom side of that bracket, just doing math on tip off and end of game and whatnot, like the earliest those teams are getting back to the hotel is probably 10 o'clock or later, and then the championship game is 1 p.m. the next day. So just to put some timestamps on that for everybody.